Hello, this is Anna. I am gonna just wait a second to see if anybody shows up for live, and if not, we probably won't do this one today. I guess we'll see. Hi, Artemis! I'm so happy you're here. I wasn't sure whether I was gonna end up doing this or not. Sorry, it took me a couple minutes to get technical difficulties figured out. That's kind of par for the course for me. Um, can you hear everything all right? Can you hear some pretty music in the background? Yay, perfect. So there's a really good chance it's just going to be the two of us today. So I'm just going to go ahead and start as though it's just going to be the two of us. Yay, thank you. Perfect. I have called in sacred space, but we can call in sacred space together also. I don't know if you have any sage or anything, but I'm going to do a little bit of saging right now, and I hope that you'll join me to either just allow the essence into your room or anyone who may happen to see this in the future, or if you have some sage of your own, you're welcome to, or light some candles. And just real quick, as far as creating sacred space, we do not ever have to do anything like that. You just have to have your love, your heart, your intentions, your temple is your body. But anytime you do added things to feed the light in the room or to feed the essence of the room, it is just kind of like gravity. It creates just an added magnetic effect for spiritual experiences. So, like I said, you don't ever have to do it, but there is a reason why it feels nice when you do, because it just does add kind of a magnetic, almost gravitational effect for spiritual experience. So, let me see if I can find my lighter. My sage is right here, but let me see if I can find that real quick. Hmm. Here it is. A long one for my candles. We will just take a couple minutes to bathe the room spiritually, which is what sage does. Sage is like a spiritual shower. It's just a really loving way of cleansing any dense energies, any anger, frustration. Um, kind of helps to create a feeling of clarity in the room. So to clear babble or confusion. So I had already done some in this space prior to us starting this video. But we'll do it anyway. Here, we do this an awful lot here. The house smells like sage a lot. And it'll still keep just kind of smoking over there for a couple minutes. All right. Ooh, bells. Yes, bells are great. You can use, sometimes I'll utilize some chimes. It's a really pleasant way of bringing some tones into a room. Now, what you'll discover probably, hi Tiffany, what you'll discover as I share some of my story is rarely in my life, a huge part of this last couple years for me has been kind of embracing and owning into my more masculine traits. But I was always very open femininely with some of those upper chakras, with inspiration and things like that, and didn't really know how to put them into use. I had really no self-confidence whatsoever. I'm feeling a little naked right now because I don't have my mala on, I realize, so I'm going to throw it on real quick. All right, here we go. And I'm going to make sure that we're logged out of anything that's going to make noises. go. So, most of the things that you'll see around me, even though they are beautiful, they're either things that have come with me through many, many moves and have adopted an essence that they just mean a lot to me, or they are gifts. This thing right here, this says your vibe attracts your tribe. That was given to me by who I would consider like numero uno tribe member with me. This was someone who was going through some real challenging times, and unfortunately we lost that friend to those challenges. But this is one of my most valued possessions, and it says your vibe attracts your tribe. This is a good few dollar thing I got the day that Jamie and I got married, which was a very not big to do type of thing anyway, and that's one of the most valuable things in the entire house to me. So I do want to be really clear about the fact that sacred things that you surround yourself with for purposes of, you know, ceremony or things like that, they don't have to cost a lot of money, and it's not, the essence is what you imbue it with. Actually, we'll spend a lot of time talking about that as we get into discussions on like Egyptian magic, Egyptian ancient healing techniques, and light magic. But really, the things that are the most valuable to me are things that might not seem at all valuable to most other people, but they mean a tremendous amount to me. In fact, this necklace, which has a beautiful feather on it that I wear, you probably almost always see me wearing it with my mala. This one doesn't have any actual crystals on it. I think this just came from Target. This wasn't anything fancy or expensive, but it reminds me of the same person that made this. And when they passed on, the feather on it reminded me of an angel wing. So I wear it because now it's extremely valuable to me, even though I'm sure that it wasn't very expensive, you know. So I do want to just make sure that you know that to treat yourself with love and light, and to fill yourself with love and light in that way, is not something, it depends on how you imbue things with essences. And that's a lot how crystals work and stuff anyway. Things like crystals work because they give off a vibrational resonance that creates an essence that's really healing. And so you can actually, you can do that. You are magical. You are powerful enough to imbue your sacred things with a sacred resonance that's going to be really healing for you. And to be honest, you probably do this without even meaning to. Sometimes I would guess nearly anyone who ends up watching this at some point has items that are extremely priceless to them, and yet to other people they might not be. So now, speaking of that, you are priceless, and oftentimes we are one of those things that we don't realize is priceless. One of those things that is imbued with a sacred essence, that is imbued with love and light, and we sometimes don't realize it. I'm realizing I've got a big yin yang diagram on my mirror back here that I think is going to drive me a little crazy, so I'm gonna wipe that off real quick. Here we go. All right. Hi, honey. I see you're on here now. It's good to see you. And I'm pretty much always have either coffee, kombucha, or water. Lots and lots of water. I'm sure that anyone who is aware of kind of some of the things that are going on with the ascension right now is probably really, really, really thirsty. Drink a lot of water. I've got a huge thing of water right here too. So I figure Artemis, my other friend, I'm not going to call her by name, but the other friend that had asked to know a little bit more about my journey, there's actually, to be honest, there were 3 that happened just this morning. Yes. I bet that's worth more than that necklace. She says she got a necklace from a friend, or a stone from a friend, and made it into a necklace. And my guess is that's probably one of your most prized possessions. So what I think might be the most effective path to tell you about what I've been through and what my healing process was. I really thought about it this morning because, like I said, there were 3 different people in a very short period of time who had kind of asked similar question. And I decided I wrote something in December of 2017 that was at a really monumentally important part of my path, and I'd like to share that. I don't know if if you guys are in like a hurry, if there's anyone in here that would be opposed to me sharing, talking about healing my inner child and what that process was like. Is that something you guys are okay with me sharing? Okay, I figured you probably would be. I do want to let you know that I haven't read this in a while, and I was raised in a very patriarchal religion, and the religion that I was raised in is the dominant religion in the place where I still live, and it is also very heavily branched into the state system. And so, while that was extremely painful for me growing up, I also feel like I purposely made sure that I would be born here so that I could help to heal an imbalance in my community, so that those who feel as isolated as I did don't feel so alone. The suicidal rate in my community is outrageously high. The LGBT community is really not embraced with anywhere near the love and light that they should be, and that's a really again, like, I think that's feeding the suicidal issues that we have here. I know that I struggled with suicidal feelings really my whole life up until this last couple of years, or even really basically this was the turning point for me, if I'm going to be honest. So, and that's not even, I mean, 2 years ago is when I resolved myself to absolutely just determine to want to live, but it took a long time to actually get there too. So, the reason I'm sharing that about the religion that here, I don't want to ostracize any religion. I don't want to ostracize anyone from any religion, and I don't want anybody to feel like they can't listen to what I have to say because they feel like I'm shutting down any specific religion or anything. So I do know that when I wrote this, because it was for my healing and I didn't know if I was ever going to share it with anyone besides my husband, there may be a couple of times where I just use my own discernment to not say certain things that I've shared in here, just for making sure that I don't ostracize anyone. I also experienced a sexual abuse as a child, and it's my deepest, deepest, deepest desire that that person, we were not in any level of communication, but I would, after there were years and years where I associated so much pain with that it just was hard for me to even imagine this person forgiving themselves. And now it's my deepest hope, my deepest prayer is that that person would forgive themselves, and that they're at peace, and that their family is at peace. And so if there's anything in here that I feel like, if for any chance them or their family ever saw this video, might make it so that basically I'm going to use my discernment as I'm reading this to determine if there might be a couple of things not to share. But I do believe that there's a good chance that sharing this private of things might actually really benefit other people who are healing or attempting to heal. I do want to talk about, first of all, when I wrote this down, I didn't think I would probably ever share it with anyone, like I said, besides my husband. It was for healing. So writing is one of those monumentally important things. We have a supercomputer. This body is a pluriloquic, magical, incredible supercomputer that is designed to process and release emotions with extreme efficiency. And we don't learn how to do that very efficiently, most of us, when we're growing up. But there are so many effective ways to release these emotions, and putting them down on paper is one of those. And you don't ever, ever, ever have to share those things. One of the great things about putting it down on paper is you can burn it, which is so transmutative. You can write things that you would never normally write. You can say words, curse words. You can say whatever. You can just allow that to be a release. Now, this was not that kind of a release, but I do want to say that just in general, whether you consider yourself a writer or not, writing is not only an extremely effective way of helping to release some of these emotions from your physical avatar, they are also, you may find that you have more creativity than you thought. You may even channel in some of those moments and find yourself doing some automatic writing, and might even accidentally kind of stumble into some gifts you didn't realize that you had, as you're also releasing some of these deep, dark, dense feelings. So that, I think, is really mostly what my intention was when I wrote this down. And so it's kind of long. I hope that you guys have the time. I can always stop, and there's parts where I certainly will stop, and I'll express some stuff to you guys. And my husband, as he's watching, is probably a little mind blown right now because he's probably pretty shocked that I'm going to share this on a public scale right now. I've only ever shared this. I shared it with a couple of his kids once when they were really struggling with some things, but other than that, never shared this. So writing was my refuge since I was a child. Still do. Never stop, Artemis. And if you're still writing, feel free to share with me or share some. I don't know if that's your dig or anything, but I would love to see what you write. And anyway, so I wrote this on December 4th, 2017. And someday I'll tell you guys exactly what I had just come through. I had experienced a really, really particularly dark point that I wasn't even sure was still possible on my progression. But for me, I can see now that that was a pivot point for me, that was, that was my tipping point where everything really did change. It was within a few days of that time that I adopted. It had been months since I had received the name Anya, Sophia, but I really wasn't comfortable with talking about it on a public level. I was still embracing getting over some of those fears. So it is actually, this was written on December 4th, 2017. And I think if you look at my Facebook profile for Anya, I think I started that on December 7th or December 8th. So this was just a couple of days before I really, on a public level, stepped through my third chakra terror and started to embrace my transmutation in a little bit more public sense. And that was really, really terrifying for me. I'm sure you guys can imagine that wasn't embraced entirely lovingly. A lot of people thought I was just losing my marbles. I have family members, like directly close family members, that still won't friend that account because to them it's just kind of silly, and that's okay. But it was really healing for me to step into that. The name that I was born with, which is Whitney, it's a beautiful name, but it's never one that I felt particularly connected to. I even tried to so hard when I was older. I looked up what it meant. It meant White Island, and in a way that actually made me feel more connected to it because I felt so isolated myself. I felt kind of like a white island, just like that nobody really knew what I had inside, and that I felt very isolated. So that was the closest I ever felt connected to my name, but in a spiritual sense. I don't think everybody is supposed to adopt a different name or do anything like that, but I do think for me that was a huge part of my healing process, was not only the way I received my name, which is something we'll talk about another time maybe, but stepping into it and stepping out of the fear of people thinking I'm silly or people thinking I'm crazy or anything. I just don't care anymore because I know what I've been through. I know how hard I've earned the confidence that I have in myself, and that it was not an easy process. And so this, like I said, this was written at just like an absolutely integral part in my growth process. And so I'm hoping that maybe you guys can grow some from it too, or learn some from it. And you certainly learn a lot about me. So I called this Sitting with My Inner Child. Yeah, I'll just start. So, throughout these last couple of weeks, my primary focus during meditation and deep thought has been to reconnect with and nurture my inner child. I'm going to grab that picture anyway. It's kind of a ridiculously big picture. My grandpa was a photographer. He used to have this hanging in his photography studio. But it's me as a baby. Anyway, so my primary focus during meditation and deep thought has been to reconnect with and nurture my inner child. This has been very uniquely eye-opening, and this experience has given me insight into my child self and adult self that has been beyond priceless. Memories so visceral, I could see and smell and feel them. At first, I wasn't sure I'd be able to connect with a childhood I had tucked away safely. I hadn't necessarily forgotten all my childhood memories, but I'd certainly tucked away most of them, and I knew that but I also knew that I've spent the majority of my adult life up until this point trying not to think about most of them. Perhaps in processing my youth, I found it easier to focus my attention on one or two particularly painful events and sweep the vast majority of shattered pieces of pain under a harrowingly growing rug. To begin this process, I wasn't sure how I was going to connect with that beautiful 4-year-old version of myself. She seemed to be so far in my past, I had no idea if there was a pathway strong enough to reach her. So I let my imagination take the wheel. I imagined myself walking into my childhood home, designed and built by my hardworking father. All 5 of my siblings and I were raised in this home, and my parents didn't rebuild elsewhere until we were grown up. All of my childhood memories, the good and the bad, took place in, or at least while I lived in, the comfort and the isolation of these walls. I walked in the door and could immediately smell the familiar smells of my mother baking something sweet, most likely cinnamon rolls. Though I didn't sense that my parents or siblings were in the house. A small part of me wanted to wander through the house, taking it all in, but I decided instead to head directly to our basement door. I opened it and walked the familiar winding staircase to the bottom level and took a right. I passed through a common room, and in a matter of just a few moments, I had reached my old bedroom door. I turned the knob and entered the bedroom, took a few short steps to the closet door, and slowly pressed it open. There she was, hidden on the floor, huddled behind a few hanging items of clothing. My 4-year-old self, hidden away in the dark, which had often felt like the only place it was safe to be myself. Or at least I could pretend it was safe to be myself. I sat down next to her, and thus began the building of trust between the two of us, myself and my inner child. Amongst the following memories, some of them have been remembered at the surface all throughout my lifetime. Some of them, however, have surfaced in floods of visceral feelings and experiences. All of them together tell some incredibly poignant facts about that sweet child. So now I'm quoting a conversation with my grandfather. Grandpa, what if everything in the universe, everything that has ever existed or will exist since the beginning of time, is really just taking place inside of a raindrop in someone else's universe? And what if everything that's ever happened in our universe has happened in just the amount of time it takes for a raindrop to fall from the sky to the earth in that universe? This question was asked to my most trusted confidant, the man who was always the best listener to my endless theories about life and philosophy. I was only about 4 or 5 years old at the time and just about knocked my grandfather right off his shoes or out of his shoes with that question. It was met with awe, mostly. Not a validation that it may indeed be truth, because he did not see the universe that way. However, it was still incredible to him that my mind worked in such a fascinating way. It was no wonder that throughout my childhood, my grandfather was my closest friend. I always felt the very safest around him. Questions of this nature were not always met with my grandfather's level of acceptance. There was no one I felt I could speak openly this way with besides him. In fact, when I did share these kinds of deep thoughts with other adults I was surrounded by, they were met with incredible fear. These questions do not fall in line with the religious dogma I was forcefully told to accept in my childhood. And of course, and even stirring these heretical questions, especially by a young child, a young female child, was of course met with judgment, insults, mostly just fear. It was met with fear. The most searing insult that proved to effectively imprint itself into my psyche was, Satan puts thoughts and questions like that in your head. Well, I knew in my heart that for every one of those deep questions that I expressed vocally, there were dozens that I didn't express. I was flooded by these questions about seeming contradictions in the lessons I was being taught. I was plagued by questions. If Satan's job was to put questions like this in people's minds, surely he must have had very special plans for me. Sorry. Because I had nothing but questions. There was no doubt about it. Deep down, I must be evil. One of these insights I had at a young age was that I must be Christ. I knew I was not Jesus, the man that had lived 2,000 years ago. But for some reason, I felt sure in my heart that I was Christ. I didn't know how to reconcile those two seemingly conflicting thoughts, because there was definitely no guide or mentor who could guide me through these thoughts. I did, however, feel pretty sure that my friend Jesus would help me understand someday. You see, there were bits and pieces of the religion I was raised with that resonated with my child heart. But those were almost always the parts that spoke about a man who loved his spiritual brothers and sisters so deeply that his love for them had an ability to bring about healing. A man who seemed like a great friend and a teacher. A man who said, everything I can do, you can do also. In fact, you can do things I've never dreamed of. That guy seemed like my friend. That guy seemed like someone I knew inside, even though I didn't know how I knew him. But it never seemed like the guy I knew in my heart would tell me that he was the way that I would be saved. That seemed in direct conflict with what my heart was telling me. But guess what? I was very young, only around 6 or 7, definitely before my baptism, which is something that's required at 8 years old in the religion I was raised in. I was only around 6 or 7 when I realized that even thinking these thoughts must be proof that I was basically Satan's personal project. I became convinced that I was not only not my own Christ, but that it was far more likely that I was some sort of embodiment of Satan himself. Around this same age, I have a memory of playing with my free spirit radiating in a field behind my elementary school. It was safer times back then, and The kids in the neighborhood would play outside for hours on end, so it was no surprise to have me wandering around somewhere. I don't think my parents could have kept me inside if they tried. I was addicted to the trees and outside, but sorry. It was safer times back then, and the kids in the neighborhood would play outside for hours on end, so it was no surprise to have me wandering around somewhere, exploring, playing alone. I was doing cartwheels, across the field, proud of myself for keeping my balance and developing my acrobatic skills. I remember there was a man there, flying a beautiful kite. Part of me knew I should not approach him, but his kite looked so fun. I cartwheeled over to the man, and of course, without hesitation, because I had no fear when I was that age, I asked if I could play with his kite. This was met with a warm and playful sounding response. And what will you give to me? It may have sounded warm and playful, but for whatever reason, it did not feel that way. I was confused and asked what he meant. He replied if I knew what it meant to get laid. I replied no, which was an honest answer. I had no idea. It was the first time I'd ever even heard that term. Though you can probably guess that I never forgot after that day. He told me he wanted me to come with him over to the bushes in the corner behind the building where he'd show me something that was more fun than any kite. And afterwards, he'd let me keep his kite. My intellect told me that I should be excited by this offer, but literally every cell in my body was screaming that I was in incredible danger. This was many years before the Matrix movies came out, but I remember feeling like everything was going in slow motion. I could hear and feel every heartbeat with such pronounced force that I was certain this man could feel my heart beating too. As calmly as I could possibly fake, I told him I wanted to do more cartwheels for a couple minutes, but that I would head over to the bushes, and I promised I would meet him there shortly. He made me promise as emphatically as possible that I would join him, then reluctantly made his way over there while I pretended to show interest in more cartwheels. The moment he was out of the line of sight, I ran like I had never run before. I ran so hard I was sure my legs would give out, but somehow they continued to carry me till I was safely in my own yard. I waited in my yard for what felt like hours as I took in and attempted to process what had just happened. But in hindsight, could just as easily have been only a few moments. I remember feeling overwhelmed by guilt, especially since I had been the one to approach the man. I also felt like I had probably deserved whatever awful things he'd been planning to do to me, and I was grappling with whether I had done the right thing by running away. In hindsight, I'm amazed at how brave that young girl was. She not only instinctively recognized the danger, but that she may be in even more danger if she simply ran. She realized she needed to get the much larger, much faster, much more dangerous man out of her line of sight before running. That level of instinctive maturity at 6 years old was something I should have been incredibly proud of, but I felt so ashamed. And I shamed myself deeply for it. I was about 5 or 6 years old when I had a more amusing experience, at least in hindsight. I had always just known things without knowing how I knew them. I knew things were going to happen moments before they did, or occasionally days before. I somehow knew what people were thinking, but didn't know how I knew. Nor did I know what I was knowing. It was very confusing for me, and I didn't feel that I had a safe place to ask these questions. I could ask my grandfather without feeling judged by him, But these abilities were so far outside of his awareness that he still couldn't really give me answers. He just loved me adoringly. As you can imagine, being so young and not understanding these inner gifts, I was desperate for some understanding about what I was experiencing. In about 1992, this is one of my favorite childhood memories. In about 1992, very late one night, I was watching an infomercial for a psychic hotline, or I was watching television when an infomercial for a psychic hotline came on television. I don't think I'd ever even heard the term psychic before this in my life, or at least in this life. But I knew instantly when I saw this commercial that it was the answer to my question. Even though they said over and over and over on the call, you must be 18 and older to call. You must be 18 or older to call. I simply could not help myself. I needed answers. I picked up the phone and dialed. When the line finally got through to someone, I apologetically fumbled out the words, "I'm so sorry, I'm only 5. I know you aren't supposed to, or I know you aren't supposed to call until you're 18, but I don't know what else to do. I'm pretty sure I'm a psychic and I'm not one person to talk to about it. But I just know things and I don't know how. My church doesn't believe in this stuff and everybody around me will think I'm bad. But I need some answers. Please help me." I think I probably spit that whole thing out in about 4 seconds. I was just desperate. I'm sure this poor woman felt so conflicted. I'm sure part of her wanted to reach through the phone and take me into her arms and remove me from whatever pained existence I was clearly struggling through. But she was also restricted by space-time and the small issue of the law. So instead, she chose her words very carefully. She replied, "Beloved child, you are a psychic. Please know you are safe and loved, and you will come into your gifts as you mature. Understand that I cannot speak to you more, but rest easy. This is not in your mind. You are not crazy." It's one of the greatest gifts I was ever given in my life. The sense of peace brought about by this information, combined with the thousands of additional questions that came flooding in, is yet another example of the kneading and pulling of contrast that was going on inside of my soul. I will probably never know who that random woman was working for that particular psychic hotline. I don't even know if she was truly in touch with her psychic gifts in this life at that time. However, she changed my life. The simple gift that she gave me was priceless. Speaking of priceless, the phone call was not. Of course, my parents came looking for the culprit of like an $18 phone call to psychic hotline. I took accountability for my call, and though I don't recall what excuse I made for calling, I do remember that they were able to call management and advise them that a 5-year-old had been the counselor, and they were graciously refunded, in addition to everyone having a good laugh about it, I think. Now we're going to take it to a little more steamy topic. So now how about a really steamy topic? Masturbation. Yowza. Talk about tickling the shame pleasure mean. Like most little girls, I discovered the pleasure of my clitoris at a very innocent age, in a very innocent way. And like most little girls, I was delighted by it. But it didn't take me long to realize it was a shameful behavior, to be met with either laughter and humiliation or scolding. I sure as hell did not get the memo that this was a normal or healthy behavior. And the more I loved it, the more I hated myself. I mean, certainly Satan's progeny did not deserve to experience such pleasure. And it seemed obvious to me that no one around me had ever suffered from such pleasurable desires. I mean, obviously no one else had ever masturbated, right? as a coping mechanism to fix the multitude of feelings and questions I was plagued with. Wait a second. I'm wondering if I got out of order. I told you I haven't read this in a very long time. I'm sorry. Well, I guess maybe I just didn't go into that much more on this. I did a video on healing the feelings associated with my shame. I had so much shame associated with it. I've already done a video on that. I must really have not gotten into that much in this. I thought that I had a little bit more, but I did not. So anyway, as a coping mechanism to fix the multitude of feelings and questions I was plagued with, I did my very best to put on the act of the perfect member of my church. I followed every rule and guideline. I did so earnestly because I genuinely wanted to believe every single word. My goodness, life would have been so much easier if I could have just believed everything that they were telling me. But I didn't. So I did everything in my power to try. I read my scriptures. I prayed faithfully. I participated in any and every activity the church offered. The first real indication I gave my parents that I was struggling with the church was when I was nearing the age of 8. Baptism is an important ritual and rite of passage in the church I was raised in, and doing so at 8 years old is an expectation. My understanding was that the reason for the age of 8 was because then children would be old enough to determine if they had a testimony or not, and could enter into the baptismal covenant upon their own free will. Well, I really, really wanted a testimony. I really tried hard, studied and prayed, but I knew I wasn't ready yet. Maybe I'd be ready when I was 9. I asked my parents to give me permission to wait until I was 9, because hopefully I would be ready then. Their response was, "The Lord says you should get baptized at 8, and you will get baptized at 8. Now, I want to be clear that I don't hold any kind of anger or frustration towards my parents for that. You know, there's a lot of complexities that go into it, but that was a really painful decision for me personally. This was a major violation of my trust, my understanding of the purpose of getting baptized at 8, and of my free will. My husband asked me early in our relationship if my object rape that happened when I was 11 years old was my most traumatic memory, to which I very promptly responded, "No, my baptism is." I think the quick response surprised me almost as much as it surprised him, because it was so honest and raw, an unfiltered response. After my baptism, which I wept uncontrollably through, I was given a blessing of confirmation. That's what it's called. The congregation all seemed so moved by my tears that many of them commented, "It's amazing how strong the Spirit is in you." I continued to cry, wipe my tears, smile, and nod in agreement with them, though deep inside I knew the truth. I was a fraud. I didn't have a testimony, and I wanted to be anywhere in the universe besides where I was in that moment. It was within a few weeks of my baptism that I tried committing suicide for my first time. It felt like I had sold my soul. And of course, it made me feel about 1,000,000 times worse for feeling that way. I so conflicted inside. It seemed like the only solution that could bring genuine relief was death. I thought I was probably going to hell, but I was sure I was going there anyway, and I saw no benefit in suffering through this life any longer. Just to put hell off for a little bit longer in the big picture. My 8-year-old self swallowed a big bottle of pills. I got more violently sick than anything I could even imagine. I had no idea the level of physical misery a sickness could induce before that experience. I know that anyone who knew me during my childhood could validate that I had an unusually sensitive heart. I loved to volunteer in any and every way that I could, with old people, with sick people, with sad people, with mentally handicapped, going to hospitals, convincing my parents to let me send my allowance to whatever foundation on TV had made my heart cry that day. I always had a soft spot for the underdog in any situation. I was most likely to befriend those who seemed isolated, probably because I felt the most like them. I had a very, very deep fondness for and volunteered for many years with kids in special education. The love they radiated was like walking through a love bath. Oh, so awesome. I loved nature shows and watched them faithfully, yet could not help but cry quietly every dang time a lion got a gazelle. Yes, my heart definitely drove, but I also felt completely certain that I was Satan's personal project, and there was nothing I could do to avoid the plaguing questions he filled me with. I'm sure that everything around me was alive and conscious. It seemed so obvious to me. Every bug, every animal, every piece of dirt, every wall, everything. I was sure they were conscious. I was sure I was being watched constantly. In fact, I remember when the Truman Show was released, I thought, how could the writers possibly know I feel this way? Only it was far more intense than the movie because it felt like every inch of everything was watching me. I understand now how accurate I was, because everything is conscious. But imagine being a beautiful, innocent child who was convinced that she's evil, and having conscious beings watching every move, judging every move. It was terrifying. It didn't bring any comfort, and it did not bring the comfort it certainly would have brought if I was aware of their love for me. While desperately attempting balancing the act of the perfect church member, perfect student, perfect daughter, just perfect in general, or trying, I couldn't help my fascination with learning about more alternative things. I remember trying to get my hands on any book on the occult or Wicca, religion, ethics, philosophy. From the time I was a little kid, I was getting these even from my elementary school. I remember going and getting books on Greek mythology from my elementary school libraries and sneaking them into my closet and reading them because I was afraid I'd be in trouble. Been really kind of doing that my whole life. I secretly flourished in the times that I could dive into this information. It felt like home to me. Probably a very familiar frequency for many people who will end up watching this. In fact, I could remember very specifically something that didn't make any sense to me. I had a profound memory of being burned alive for being a witch. How could this possibly make any sense, though? There was no such thing as past lives or reincarnation in the religion I was brought up in, so I had no frame for reference for this kind of information that I intuitively knew about myself. The internet didn't exist yet, so my ability to access this knowledge was heavily restricted unless I sought answers inside, which was very scary for me and felt like validation that I was indeed bad inside. I never had any dark feelings towards others or dark intentions, so it was confusing to me that people considered these things dark. When I studied magic or alternative things, it was only ever with a desire to heal or help, and I safeguarded my study of these subjects for the most part. Unfortunately, the couple times it ever became known openly that I was interested in these subjects, I was heavily ridiculed and called a witch. The verbal force behind the word was intended as a vicious insult. I also remember a time in the schoolyard when I was in 6th grade that a bunch of kids were making fun of me and they just yelled, "Burn the witch! Burn the witch!" To them, it was probably no different than pretending pretending to be pirates or playing cowboys and Indians. All I know is that I had never been more scared before, and I didn't realize at that time that this group of children had unwittingly triggered a deep fear mechanism. They had a deep neural pathway for past life memory, saying exact words crowds of people had said just moments before literally burning me alive in other lives. I remember now that I have been burned alive for being a witch on many occasions. However, the memory I had at this point in my childhood was about a specific life during which I had not been involved with Wicca or the occult. In the life I remembered, I had been a plant lover and a talented botanist who knew and understood the healing effects of different plants. I only ever wanted to serve my community and had done this using the glorious gifts of the Earth Mama. I was a gifted healer, and for this I was burned alive. This explains my early deep-rooted fascination with plants and my early behavior of starting to create various different healing potions with plants in my environment that I knew nothing about yet. Just plain. The first time I was ever verbally introduced to the idea of past lives was by accident from my parents. They certainly didn't know it was a subject matter I'd already pondered many times, but they couldn't help but notice my very hippie spirit. They would joke that I certainly must have lived through the 70s because I practically danced out of my mother's womb as a flower child. An ironic thing to joke about, especially considering that I actually died on the way out of the birth canal in this current lifetime. I certainly didn't have people around me to model flower child-esque behavior. They were obviously kidding about me living through the 70s, but may never realize how likely it is that they were spot on. Being put into the gifted and talented program when I was in 2nd grade had effectively etched another target symbol on my back. I was separated in every class I took through elementary, given different assignments, and held to different expectations. While this was meant to be an honor of sorts, it served to isolate me even further from other students my same age. But it didn't immerse me with older students either. I loved learning and studying and relished having deep, long conversations, mostly with adults. This was weird and I felt ashamed of it, which is so sad and silly when I think about it now. Obviously, I can see now how a deep internal desire to be accepted tainted my perspective of one of my greatest gifts, my intelligence. I was a very athletic child, the tomboy girl in a family where I had 4 brothers. I do have one sister. She was not quite as tomboyish as me, we'll put it that way. I had a playfully competitive spirit. I didn't particularly like to compete in sports or on teams. However, when it came to my brothers, I took my motto from the Little Orphan Annie very seriously. Anything you can do, I can do better. And most of the time I was right. Just kidding. They would argue that, I'm sure. Contact is driving me crazy. But it was always meant to be playful and fun. I had one brother in particular who absolutely could not stand my very existence, and he made sure to tell me and show me this regularly. He found great pleasure in humiliating me. Being 2 years older than me in school, this had a very direct effect on my home life, church life, and my school life. He regularly told me that he wished I had never been born. Now, I don't know if he ever meant that, but I definitely felt very, 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 very sure that he did mean it when he was saying it when I was a kid. Almost every horrible thing he ever said about me, I believed deep in my heart. And if I argued or even tried to even if I argued it or tried to defend it out loud. Well, I loved just about any activity that got me out and moving, especially in the trees. My two favorite forms of expression were singing and freely dancing, as in non-choreographed dance. Dance from my heart and soul. This is very, very healing. Do it often, please. I was asked to sing solos publicly at school, which was thrilling to me at the time. It was one of the few talents I was truly actually proud of as a child. Dance was something I was very good at. However, I really wasn't great at choreographed dance. Well, maybe I was okay at it. I didn't like it as much as just dancing freely. I was pretty good at choreographed dances, never the best in class, never the worst. However, if I could just dance freely where music just happened to dance through my soul, then I would truly come alive. That's true joy, and the effect was contagious to anyone around me. This is part of the reason people joked that I came dancing out of the womb. I'm pretty sure I skipped the walking stage and went straight to the dancing my little heart out. But the attention I received from my talents always came with some positivity, but sprinkled with shadows of caution. I was either told, you just love attention, you love attention. Well, every kid loves attention, especially when they have 5 siblings, 6 siblings, 8 siblings, 12 siblings, however. I mean, when a mother is looking at her baby and feeding them, every time she's feeding them with either her by nursing them or by giving them a bottle, she's also usually looking at them and giving them her physical attention. So the baby is being fed physically, but also being fed energetically. And as the babies get older, they don't receive that same level of physical attention on them, or if they don't, they start to not understand why they're not getting that level of attention. And if they're shamed for wanting that attention, either they can shut down or they might act out and get attention in other ways because they don't understand why they're still wanting to be fed attention, even though it's negative attention. But we have a tendency to really make people feel a lot of shame for getting attention, and then that makes people not want it, and that's not encouraging a future of leaders. That's not encouraging a future of self-loving individuals. I'm not saying you need to give your kids constant attention, or your neighbors or your whatever, but it's just probably not a good idea to shame people for wanting attention, because it is a very, very human thing. And then to shut that down is heart-wrenching, is kind of what I ended up doing. So the attention I received from these talents always came with mostly positivity, sprinkled with a few shadows of caution. Be careful when you're asking for attention. You never know what attention you're going to get. Don't you know that being beautiful or putting yourself in the limelight makes you prey to the wrong people? These words of caution, mixed with a lifetime of feeling convinced that I was Satan's personal project, deserving of bad things happening to me, made it almost impossible for me to process my actual rape when it happened when I was 11 years old. I was object raped with the blade of a knife. And to me, it was the validation that I was a bad person. I deserved bad things to happen to me, and I practically asked for this to happen because I even liked attention. Obviously, this was my own fault, and I didn't like attention from him, but I liked attention in general, and I felt like obviously I had asked for this. And anyway, he was a member. I'm not going to go into who he was at all. Like I said, this is something I would hope that this person has healed from. But we'll say that there were some complexities that made it so that handling it in any like officially perfect way, there's just no way to do that. And you know, a lot of ways I got left feeling like I wasn't probably worthy of being very protected. And I don't want to fault anybody in the equation. I know there was no perfect way to handle it. I know I can see every single reason I would have gone through any of those experiences purposely from a cosmic standpoint, but I do know at the time it was really hard for me. I do remember the day after just weeping for him because I knew he was going to get in trouble. And I felt like if I wasn't Satan's personal project, this wouldn't have happened anyway. And I felt like guilty for the trouble that he was going to get into. So anyway, in my child mind, sorry, I'm leaving certain parts out that might affect like my family. So I didn't feel like he should be more punished than he was. You see, my child mind felt like it was my own fault. Something this despicable had happened to me, and that my abuser was the victim of Satan's plan for me. I wept for the pain and the fear that he would suffer upon getting in trouble, knowing intuitively that I would actually be able to feel those feelings empathically as he experienced them. So I knew I would suffer even more. While the overall circumstances, I really don't want to get into that part either. I'm not going to talk more about that particular thing. Anyway, so I had shut down on the night of my rape and received validation that I was horrible and unlovable soul. I didn't feel any pain in my vagina with the insertion of the blade, but I did stop feeling pleasure down there after that night. While I was sure that my masturbation was one of the many things I was being punished for anyway, I could not have even possibly masturbated after that if I'd tried. I had no physical sensation in my cervical region any longer. I shut down my feelings there and in so many other places. I shut down my intuition. I shut down my foresight. I shut down my gifts. I stopped seeking the limelight. And I accepted my unlovable nature. During all of these years developing the blueprint for my adult patterns, I had looked at incredible gifts and powers as proof that I was bad. Almost like living out my own personal inquisition inside. During the most difficult, darkest of these times when absolutely no one else knew, I would go hide in my closet. I would just pretend I lived in a world where I was accepted and my gifts were not scary to myself or anyone else. I would just pretend to have conversations with my buddy Jesus. So in the dark, alone in my closet, was the only place where I felt light. So I knew my closet was where I would need to go to find 4-year-old Whitney, my 4-year-old self. I was right. The mutual nurturing and comfort that we have been providing one another these last couple of weeks, Skins was in December, has been extraordinary. The messages I'm trying to gently guide her towards are, beloved little one. And this I would say to anyone else who is questioning anything. Say this to yourself, your inner child. You questioning things is like a source-given GPS of the heart. It will guide you to find your own answers, to find your own truths. Your heart GPS is not only working well, it is truly inspirational. Follow your heart, little lady. You are wise, far beyond your years. 1, 2, you are not now, nor have you ever been Satan's personal project, progeny, or evil at heart. You have known him. You are divinely designed and inspired. And you have always loved him because you recognized the good in him too. Jesus is your personal friend. You are divinely designed and you have known him, loved him, and enjoyed his friendship for a millennia, many. You've laughed together and you've cried together. You recognize your friend in the lessons you've been taught. but only the parts of him you know to be true and resonate within your heart. You look up to and admire him, and he looks up to and admires you. And as you already know in your heart, you are indeed your own Savior. Like Jesus, you have a Christ consciousness at the center of your higher self. He taught the way, but he is not your way. Like your dear friend and teacher, you will achieve the level of a consciousness of spiritual evolution. 4. Your ability to perceive danger as a child was astounding. Your lightning quick critical thinking about how to escape danger, every bit as astounding. Trust in your instincts. You developed them over many lifetimes. When you put your trust in them, they will protect you beyond the level of any physical thing you could possibly have. You are so brave. 5. You are a psychic, a very gifted and well-practiced one. Embrace this part of yourself and know that you will come into your gifts. These are the things that you should most likely, or similar to types of things that you could be saying to your inner child. My guess is almost anyone that would be resonating with anything I've said already has very similar things that they could be saying to honor and love and nurture their inner child. 6. Please know, almost everyone masturbates. Everyone has the desire to masturbate at some point or many points. To give into this desire in private is completely beautiful. Get to know yourself as much as possible. Enjoy it as much as possible. With as much curiosity and fun as possible, explore yourself. Just make sure it's always in private. And understand, this will ultimately help you manifest someday. 7. Be at peace, sweet child. A forced baptism is not a baptism at all in the eyes of Great Spirit, God, Goddess, Mother, Father, God. It's merely a warm dip in a shallow pool, followed by a party. Try to enjoy it and know it is not a reflection of you whatsoever. Your Father in heaven and your Mother Earth know you. They love you more than you can imagine, and they are both very proud of you. 8. Guess what, you little Dr. Seuss in the making? You are right about everything in existence being alive and conscious. It is alive and conscious, and there are so many beings that love you. You are not being judged. You are being guided and loved. You can actually ask these different consciousnesses for advice, guidance, comfort, and many other forms of support. They would love to be accessed by you consciously. 9. You are a witch, a shaman, or a medicine woman, or a healer, a mystic, a psychic, a priestess. Whatever you want to call it or not call it. You are magic. Your magic is light. And anyone who believes otherwise is simply lacking, I'm going to say it differently, is simply in a different area of perspective. Different area of awareness. Do not fear your gifts, and do not feel shame if others fear them. Love them and love your magical self anyway. You are a guardian of the earth. Oh, sorry, this is number 10. You are a guardian of the earth. You have extensive knowledge of plants and animals and the medicine they have to offer our brothers and sisters. This is not just you playing. This is you remembering. play in this way as often as possible. 11, you have lived many times. Many, many times. 12, your school experience will not define the rest of your life. Your intelligence will not always threaten people. It is not something you should ever feel a need to hide or be shy about. Practice balance, as there is no reason to ever be boastful either. Everyone, and I mean everyone, is your teacher. 13, it is a gift to the world that you were born. I mean this to myself, but I also mean this to anyone who ever sees this video. It is a gift to this world that you were born. You are loved and wanted. 14, you have a mother and father who are proud of every decision you have ever made. I don't know anything about your earthly mother and father. I don't know what those circumstances are, but I do know without any doubt in my mind that you have a mother and father who are proud of every decision you have ever made. Your earthly parents are really just larger children trying to learn the same lessons you are. Forgive them for their difficulty in understanding you. 15. Sing as much as you can. Dance as much as you can. Paint the world with your rainbow essence. 16. You are a crystal child, a diamond with powers you haven't even begun to understand yet. Fear not. 17. Soak up every possible moment you can with Grandpa Gerald. Although he will be a very valued spiritual guide or spirit guide after he passes from this life, you will miss the physical experience with him. Soak up every second. 18. Some people fear you because they can sense your extraordinary power. Forgive them. Love them with all your heart. 19. You are a goddess in the highest. Use your voice confidently. Speak your truth. By the way, writing this was basically the kickoff for me to be able to finally do that. And 20, seek pleasure. It is your divine birthright. If you want to know the number one way to start increasing the vibration in your life, it's to seek pleasure and to do so without feeling guilty about it. That doesn't mean be selfish. That doesn't mean stop doing nice things for other people. That doesn't mean stop honoring others. It means honor yourself. Know that when you seek pleasure, you are helping density to release from your physical mechanism so that you can actually become a higher vibratory being. And that when you are a higher vibratory being, the light that you have can change someone's day even just by you being, just by you showing up. You are so powerful. You don't have to fix everybody's everything to be a good person or to be of service or to be an empath, to be a spiritual warrior, to be any of those things. You must honor yourself, honor the journey that you've been on, and give yourself things to look forward to. Artemis, I know that you're a mountain climber, or I think that was what you were saying, being out in nature like that all the time, not just being in nature, but utilizing that time with consciousness, saying, can I release, I ask to release the density and the darkness I'm feeling to the mother to be neutralized, or to actually sit down and put your rump on the earth and do that, or walk around barefoot is so good for the release of the energetic stimulation that gets really, really too high within us. But the reason I did as my last one on that 20 was because for 30 years of my life, every time I did anything that felt good, any level of pleasure, I somehow felt like I didn't deserve it. Not just talking about like, some of the more private things that I shared on there, but anytime I did something that felt pleasurable or fun, there was some part of me in the back of my head that felt like other people deserved that, but I didn't. It wasn't until I started realizing that I deserved the exact same kind of love and light that I would feed my child, my grandchild, that I started to really heal. Now that my biggest, I was like born kind of awakened and had to shut down some of those things because it was so painful. But my biggest real awakening moment as an adult was definitely having a baby. I was in a very unhealthy marriage, and I built a human with my body, and I was so proud of myself. It's the first time I've ever been proud of myself for anything, and he was just perfect. And I just have never been, I felt so empowered. I just realized that I had to start trying to find the light in my life. And as a matter of fact, his name is Lucas, which means the bringer of the light. And I didn't know that at that time. So it was very well fitting. I know I took this pretty dang private, maybe end up finding that I don't even want to post it. I don't know, but I don't know if anyone is still, if you guys would want to know. I wanted to share that part of my journey. We can go into a lot more about what I've done to heal, but healing my inner child or working with my inner child, it's one of the most profound things that I've done personally. I'll do a lot more videos on rituals and different kinds of energetic things and discussing spiritual alchemy and how that works, how to imbue things with light, or how to use light as a way to help others. But I did want you to know I earned self-love. I earned it. I earned it through extraordinary hard work. I earned it through extraordinary self-love practices. I had to practice. I did. And when I finished practicing, Artemis, I am not, you are. I guarantee you, if you were to go through your story and tell me what you've experienced in this life, you chose a really difficult mission too. We all chose different missions so that we could acquire a different skill set and that we could all come together with unity consciousness to help one another. Every single one of us purposely acquired some really challenging things and some really beautiful things, and did a combination of things. But it was all ultimately so that we could realize that we should never, ever, ever judge anyone. There's no one ever that you should judge. I promise you, no matter how pissy or bitchy they seem that day, you have no idea what they've been through, no idea how they got coded the way they got coded, what kind of pain they have experienced. You know, I don't like to look at people as toddlers in that I'm like, being mean or making fun of them or anything. We really are kind of like toddlers in a spiritual sense by the limits that we're restricted with our with our illusions and our fears. I knew we would have a lot in common. That's why I shared it. We would have a lot of similar frequencies, and I have a feeling as you reflect more, you're going to realize that the things that are coming to the surface are going to, my deepest prayer, Artemis, is that this is healing for you. Not sure if there's anything else that I could say right now, but I promise you, I'm going to continue to do more videos on how, like, what I've actually done to practice putting those things in my life. Other than just becoming a mom. I mean, in a lot of ways, that brought up more fears than anything else. But it did give me a good motivation to want to stick around. It gave me a good motivation to want to learn how to love myself, to practice those things until I could actually say that I did them. But I could tell you this much: I would not have survived this last 6 years if it wasn't for Lucas. I really, in some ways, my physical avatar and all of the depression I was suffering, if I didn't have someone I loved more than me that I was so scared to leave without a mom, I would not be sharing these lessons with you today. So, Artemis, if you want to do a private conversation, we can. I am going to post this so that other people could potentially learn from it if they want to. And just know how much I love you. I can feel you from Greece, and I am so honored to have met you. And I hope that anybody else that happens to see this can feel my love. Have a beautiful day. Love you.